Premise 2. To be a practical idealist, the foundation of it has to be the belief that change is possible. Because if change was not possible on the individual level, on the societal level, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why would I spend time? Let me just be a hedonist and try and enjoy my life as much as possible. Now, for many of you, when you look at this, you may say, well, okay, yeah, change is possible, I believe that, and why do we need to have it as a basic premise of the course, as opposed to the change is elusive? Well, in the context of a psychology course, it's anything but trivial that change is possible. Let me share with you one study to illustrate what I mean. The Minnesota twin study, one of the most famous studies in the field of psychology, was done by Lycan and Tellegen, two prominent psychologists. And what they did was they wanted to understand how much do genes matter? How much is it about nature versus nurture? So how do you test that? You look at identical twins, monozygotic twins who share the same genetic profile. And you look at those who are reared apart. Because if they're reared with the same parents, one could argue, well, they came out very similar because same environment, they look the same, they go to the same schools, same parents, and so on. But what if you're able to find identical twins who were separated at birth and reared in radically different environments? Well, you could. And they found a significant number of those reared sometimes on different continents. And they studied them. And what they found, remarkably, was significant similarities among these twins, sometimes to the point of the unbelievable. Like one set of twins, I think the name was, found a wife with the same name. They were reared different countries. Didn't know about each other until the age of 37. Married similar wives. Enjoyed drinking the same beer. Called their children by the same names. I mean, there were some mind-boggling similarities. And this was an exception, but there were quite a few of those exceptions. But more interesting for psychologists was that their personality was incredibly similar. And very interesting for positive psychologists, those concerned with well-being and happiness, their well-being and happiness levels were incredibly similar, even if they were raised in radically different environments. Lycan and Tellegen published a paper, a very influential paper in the 80s, which they called Happiness as a Stochastic Phenomenon. Happiness as a stochastic phenomenon. And they end this paper with the following quote. It may be that trying to be happier is as futile as trying to be taller, and is therefore counterproductive. This quote made me very unhappy on two accounts. This was a very influential quote. I mean, this appeared in the New York Times. They talked about it on television. They were interviewed. Very problematic, because what are we doing here? If this is the outcome of research, and rigorous research that they did, I mean, not easy research to go and look around the world, what can we do about it? Well, here is my response to that. Very simply, change is possible. And again, don't take my word for it, of course. Let me discuss that further, elaborate. There is counter-evidence where people actually do change. And we have research showing that people going to therapy very often change as a result of therapy. Work by Albert Bandura, Stanford psychologist, shows that very often people encountering one special sentence, reading it or hearing it from something, that sentence can change their lives. reading a certain book, having certain experiences, positive or painful experiences. There is this concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. There is also the concept of post-traumatic growth. So people change up or down in their levels of happiness as a result of experiences. So there is counter evidence that shows that not everyone's level of well-being is determined by their genes. In fact, there is research that shows that yes, genes do matter, and they matter a lot. But as we'll talk about during the week on change, other things matter as well. And the error that Lycan and Tellegen and many others make when they generalize and say change is not possible is what I call the error of the average. Yes, on average, when you looked at this group of 40 or 50 twins reared apart, when you look at the average, they're just about the same. However, that's not looking at individuals because, while many of them are the same, not all are the same. You know, it reminds me of a joke about the statistician who drowned in a pool with an average height of 10 inches. Drowned in a pool with an average height of 10 inches. You see, you cannot tell the height, or the depth rather, of a pool based on the average. Because that pool may be average of 10 inches, but it may have places that are 20 feet deep, if it's a large pool. The same when you look at the average of individuals and twins. The majority, or on average, they're extremely similar, but they're also outliers. And very often it's the outliers, the differences, that are the most interesting, because they stretch not just our imagination, they stretch our ability to understand when and where change is possible. The question when we see exceptions, whether it's the Lycan and Tellegen study, where we do see exceptions, not all twins were the same. Majority were, but not all. The question is no longer whether or not change is possible, but rather how is change possible. Once again, the exception proves the rule. And the research that argues that it's not possible to change is detrimental. Think about an 8-year-old girl who's very unhappy and then reads in some magazine about that study, saying that basically your genetic set point, what you're born with, is there for life. And she's unhappy and she feels anxious and miserable as an 8-year-old, and she says to herself, that's it, that's my lot in life, I was born unlucky. And that very often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and she remains unhappy. And sometimes it even makes her less happy than she was before, because now she's also helpless. Change is possible. You know, I often say that I'm the right person to teach positive psychology. Why? Because I wasn't born with quote-unquote happy genes. I was born with, genetically speaking, with relatively high levels of anxiety, inclination toward rumination, over-examination. We'll talk about that later in the course. I went into positive psychology, into the field of psychology, as I mentioned in the first lecture, because I was unhappy here. And over time, as a result of many of these studies, a result of examination, a result of asking also the right questions, I have become happier. So on a personal level, I know it's possible to become happier. Now, I'm happier today than I was 15 years ago when I started. I hope to be happier 15 years from today than I am today. It's a lifelong process, but it is possible, and many people show that it is possible. And those who argue that it's not possible and use science to argue for that very often are hurting more than helping the field. Now, by the way, Lycan and Tellegen were interviewed recently in Times Magazine issue on happiness. And let me quote to you what they said. This is in 2005, Lycan. I made a dumb statement. It is clear that we can change happiness levels, up or down. So they went back on their statement. It was a sensationalist statement at the time. It certainly is possible. So how do we do research that's more responsible, that does not lead to detrimental results, and at the same time, true? We don't want to invent research. Research is about identifying things that really happen in reality. So one of the first things that I will argue for in terms of healthy research is let's also focus on what is working. That's the first thing that we discussed in the past lecture. The second thing that I will argue for, in addition to studying what works, is also to study the best. What do I mean by that? So it's not just let's study what makes people happy. Let's not just study happy people. Let's not just study what makes happy relationships and good relationships. Let's study the happiest people. Let's study the most successful relationships and learn from that. Now that is a radically different approach than studying just the average. Because what I'm saying here is let's not study the average. Let's study the top 5% so that we can understand a phenomenon better. The person who talks about this is Abraham Maslow, when he talks about growing tip statistics. Let me read to you. This is taken from his book. What this kind of research design means is a change in our conception of statistics, and especially of sampling theory. What I'm frankly espousing here is what I've been calling growing tip statistics, taking my title from the fact that it is at the growing tip of a plant that the greatest genetic action takes place. What he's saying is that let's study the sages, the saints, the extraordinary people, the arrowhead, so that we can understand and realize the potential in all people. Let me quote him in greater length. This is very important, which is why I'm doing it. If we want to know how fast a human being can run, then it is no use to average out the speed of a good sample of the population. It is far better to collect Olympic gold medal winners and see how well they can do. If we want to know the possibilities for spiritual growth, value growth, or moral development in human beings, then I maintain that we can learn most by studying our most moral, ethical, and saintly people. On the whole, I think it is fair to say that human history is a record of the ways in which human nature has been sold short. The highest possibility of human nature has practically always been underrated. Certainly it seems more and more clear that what we call normal in psychology is really a psychopathology of the average, so undramatic and so widely spread that we don't even notice it ordinarily. Do you see the implications of what he's saying here? Essentially what he's saying is, let's not just study why do most individuals fail. Let's also study why do some, not many, but why do some individuals succeed despite the circumstances. Let's not study just the average that says that people can't really change. Let's study those people who have changed, who have literally transformed their lives and the lives of those around them. This is a radical approach to research. This is a radical approach to the search, to studying ourselves as well. Because very often if we only study the average, we only see the average, we only see the geometrical shapes and completely miss the children on the bus. And very often the answer to some of our most pressing questions lies in the extraordinary, lies in the children on the bus. Now, does anyone other than me, because I admit I fall into this category, but anyone other than me feel a little bit of dis-ease when I talk about this? Seriously, a little bit of dis-ease when I talk about let's focus on and study the best, the saints, the sages, the extraordinary. I feel dis-ease. I'm sure some of you feel that too. Because after all, isn't that elitist? Shouldn't we study the average because we're concerned not just with the elites, we're concerned with the average? So there are two answers to that. Why I still maintain, and I must admit, I still feel some dis-ease every time I teach this, every time I think about this. And then I think to why it is so important to study the best, why the growing tip statistics is such an important approach to research that I encourage my students to carry out. First of all, because it's not to the exclusion of the average. Just like positive psychology does not say, let's exclude what's not working, let's exclude study of pathology. Similarly, growing tip statistic is not saying, let's not study the average. It says, let's also study the best. So this is the first thing to alleviate the concern of elitism. But the second issue, the second response, is even more important. Because everyone benefits when we study the best. And the quote-unquote average, whatever that means, the quote-unquote average benefits even more than the best from this kind of studies. Why? For example, the study of resilience. We could have gone on and studied the average at-risk population for decades and centuries. And very little advances would have been made. Very little advances were made. It was only when we started to study those quote-unquote best examples, those successful kids, those quote-unquote super kids, as they were initially named. It's only when we started to study those that we actually understood how we can best help that population. And once we applied what we studied, the resilience issue, everyone benefited and continues to benefit from it. That's an example of growing tip statistic research. Or how about the study of meditation? So I want to study how to meditate. Do I go out to Harvard Yard and take a random sample of sophomores to study meditation? Or do I go to a mountaintop in Tibet and study the people who have been doing it for decades? Of course I go and study them, and this is exactly what psychologists did. And they studied their brain, and we'll talk about it when we talk about meditation, and they illustrated how the brain is transformed through meditation. And psychologists like John Kabat-Zinn and Richard Davidson and Herbert Benson were able to take what they learned from these extraordinary, best individuals and apply it to other people's lives so that now I benefit from meditation when I do it for 15 or 20 minutes a day, and millions of other people. The average benefits a great deal because of the study of the best, of the growing tip. How about relationships? Can you imagine a study of relationships throughout human history that focuses on the average? What's the average relationship in human history? The average relationship in human history is one in which the woman is subjugated. That's the average relationship in human history. Now, what if we just studied that? Would that be helpful? No, it was when people like John Stuart Mill, who studied his relationship, which was at the time extraordinary, realized the potential of what all relationships can be, that he wrote his book on the subjugation of women. One of the most important books of the 19th century that has led to the feminist movement and to the equality movement. But what if we only studied the average? Would that have helped relationships? Not at all. How about teaching? What do you want to do in order to learn about teaching? Go and study the average teachers, or go and study Marva Collins and then apply what Marva Collins does to all teachers? Everyone benefits when we focus on the tip of the stem, and this is why Maslow said that human nature and human potential has been sold short when we only study the average. It's also about studying our personal best. not just other people's best. Whether it's our personal best experiences, because if we study our best experiences when we were at our happiest, when we were at our most successful, when we thrived the most within the relationship, we can learn from it and apply it to our future as well. When we study our average, we're describing our life. When we're studying the best within ourselves, we're potentially prescribing. Maslow again. Few in number though they be, we can learn a great deal about values from the direct study of these highly evolved, most mature, psychologically healthiest individuals, and from the study of the peak moments of average individuals, moments in which they became transiently self-actualized. If we learn from these experiences in ourselves, the question is no longer whether or not it's possible to experience it more and more in our lives. The question is, how is it possible to experience it? All right. So we talked about changing ourselves, how it's possible, the growing tip statistic, which is the second significant idea within research in positive psychology. The first significant idea is let's study what works. The second significant idea is let's study what works best. But this is about individual change. How about societal change? I want to share with you an end today with a study. One of the most famous studies in the field called the Cambridge-Somerville Youth Study. This was a study that was run starting in the 1930s, right here, between Harvard, MIT, where the best minds, psychological minds, philosophical minds, psychiatrists, got together and said, let's create the Rolls Royce. I don't even know if there was a Rolls Royce then, but the best intervention program that we can think of. There was no limit in terms of how much money was put into it. As much as they needed, they got, and they chose 250 kids from an at-risk population. And this intervention was not a quick fix, overnight change, weekend seminar, 5-year intervention. And here is what they got. Twice a month, caseworkers visited them, helped them deal with conflicts in the family, helped them deal with issues in their lives. Half of them had academic tutoring, those who needed it. Got help, academic help. Psychiatric attention, all those who needed it, they were there. No limits on how much you needed. Whatever you needed, you got from the best minds in the field. They joined the Boy Scouts, YMCA, other youth movements, benefited a great deal, supposedly, from these experiences. They got everything. This would be a dream treatment, not just in the 1930s, today as well. This is what psychologists dream about at night. Just to introduce this. And then, measuring outcomes was as serious as the program itself. There was a random assignment. There were 250 kids who got nothing, who were also studied, just like the kids who got the 5-year intervention were studied. 250 kids in the control group. 40 years follow-up. So this was not just about change today, tomorrow for the 5 years. They followed them through much of their lives. This was serious study. This was serious intervention. And the results were shocking. Even though all those who participated in the study, whether it was the mental health workers, whether it was the philosophers and the psychologists and the professors and the psychiatrists, praised the program as the best, as highly effective, when they looked at the raw, objective data, the results were shocking. Juvenile offenses, control group versus intervention group, no difference. Over a third had official records, and 20% more had unofficial records for misdemeanors. No difference in juvenile offenses. Adult offenses later on in their lives. Again, no difference. Over 20% offenses, whether against property or against person. In both groups, the 250 here versus the 250 here, which is a significant sample size. No difference whatsoever. Other measures, physical health and mental health, no difference whatsoever. But finally, there was a significant difference, on alcoholism, the number of people who became alcoholic later on in life, as well as job status. How many people were able to get into what they termed the white-collar jobs? So at least there are results there. At least they found statistically significant results when it came to that. That's good, right? Not at all. Because these results were quote-unquote in the wrong direction, meaning there were more alcoholics in the intervention group than in the control group. There were more people in the control group making it quote-unquote at work, raising their status at work, than in the intervention group. In other words, the intervention did more harm than good. Idealism, good intention, a lot of money, wasn't practical. Now, many people who look at this study, this is a seminal study. There are very few studies in the history of psychology that were that serious. They say, well, societal change is probably not possible. Give me 1 minute, and I'll finish. Societal change is not possible, they say. Is it? Well, first of all, there are exceptions, and when we have exceptions, that proves the rule. There are programs that actually work. Whether it's the work, again, of Karen Rivich and Marty Seligman from UPenn Resilience Program. Whether it's Marva Collins, who's certainly an exception, who shows how interventions work. And it's interesting to think about the difference in what Marva Collins does, where she doesn't give the students a sense of entitlement, where she praises them, but she gives them hard love as opposed to a free lunch, where she doesn't label them as needy, and the study perhaps labeled these kids as needy. There are many differences, but the key is to study this exception and for practical idealists to come together and to say, what is working? Let's study the best. Let's study what works and then apply it. Let's spread the word. Let's do what Maslow talked about back in the 1950s. What he suggested is a Manhattan Project type attack upon what I consider to be the truly big problem of our time, not only for psychology, but for all human beings with any sense of historical urgency. The Manhattan Project, when they created the atomic bomb, and whether or not you agree with the Manhattan Project normatively, positively what... 1 second, I'm almost done. Positively, what they did there was bring together the best minds, Oppenheimer, Szilard, Fermi, Feynman, Bohr, bring them together with a mission of saving the free world. And again, whether you agree or not with the project is beside the point. It was the greatest, positively speaking, scientific project in history where their minds got together. And this is what Maslow is suggesting that psychologists do. This is also the aim of positive psychology, no less than this, to get people around the world to think about these problems, these issues. Practical idealists who will study what works, who will study the best, and through that, make a difference. I'll see you next week. What we're going to talk about today, continuing from last time, is or are the basic premises of this course. Where we're coming from, where we're going, laying down in many ways the foundation of the spiral that we're going to create for the next semester together. And last time we stopped where we talked about how difficult change is. We talked about the twin studies that illustrate that, what Lycan and Intelligence said, that maybe changing our happiness levels is as difficult and futile as trying to change our height. And then we talked about the error of the average and the mistake that these researchers are making, misunderstanding the nature of change. Because if someone changes, the question is no longer, is it possible to change, but rather, how is it possible to change? And then we talked about the Somerville-Cambridge study that showed that literally the Rolls-Royce of interventions failed. 5 years with the leading scientists, researchers, psychiatrists and psychologists from Cambridge, Harvard and MIT, putting their minds and hearts with good intentions to bring about change failure. Not only have they failed in bringing about positive change, they actually brought about negative change. Remember, alcoholism rates went up for the intervention group compared to the control group. The control group that enjoyed no intervention actually were more likely to advance in their workplace 20, 30 years later. So change is difficult, but then we went over and said, well, Marva Collins created change, so it is possible. Programs by Marty Seligman and Karen Rivich and numerous others succeed in bringing about change. And the challenge then is, for us, if our goal is to become practical idealists, is to understand what it is that brings about change and then do it. Spread the word. Spread the word about the research. Even if the research doesn't always communicate good news. It's about communicating what works, what is real, as opposed to our whims, our desires, our hopes, our wishes. That's not enough. Goodwill, idealism, good intentions are not enough. We need to be grounded in research. And this is very much what Maslow had in mind when he talked about the analogous Manhattan Project, where scientists, positive psychologists, or at that time psychologists, social scientists, would get together and pick out the tip of the stem, the few ideas, the few programs that work, and then replicate them. Study the best, and then as one of the students here, Miriam, came to me after class and she said, tip of the stem is actually about democratizing excellence. I love that phrase, democratizing excellence. Studying the best and applying it to the rest of us. Okay, so we have this grand scheme, grand idea by Maslow to create a Manhattan-type project, but what if I'm not interested in going into one of these projects? What if I'm not even interested in becoming an academic? Just want to do things on my own. Can I make a difference? And the answer is absolutely yes. One of the most significant barriers to people doing things in the world, to actually introducing change, is that they underestimate their ability to bring about change. There's a lot of research in psychology. Primarily the people who started it are Nemes and Moscovici, but many others who have done research showing how minority, very often one person, can make a big difference, can make a significant difference. Ralph Waldo Emerson, all history is a record of the power of minorities and of minorities of one. A lot to back that up in social science research. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, never doubts that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. All change begins in the mind of a single person or a small group, and then it expands. Now the question is, how does it expand, and why is it so difficult for us to understand, accept, assimilate, and live according to the fact that we can make a difference? And if we want to understand that, what we need to understand is how change happens. Change happens exponentially. Our connection to other people and their connection to others and so on creates an exponential function, which explains, for example, those of you familiar with the butterfly effect, how a butterfly flapping its wings in Singapore can theoretically cause a tornado in Florida. Because one particle hits another and another and another. It also explains the phenomenon of 6 degrees of separation, how we're all connected and all interconnected in a web, potentially, of goodness. To illustrate the exponential nature of human networks, let's look at smiles. What we know from research is that smiles are contagious. Someone smiles, makes you smile, you make someone else smile, and so on and so on. You know, even if someone goes past you in the street and you don't smile, ostensibly at least you don't smile, there are certain micro muscles in your face that are moving that actually make you feel better. So smiles are contagious. Now, if you smiled to or made 3 people smile, and these 3 people, each one made 3 other people smile, and those 9 people then each one made 3 other people smile, within 20 degrees of separation from your initial smile to the 3 people, the entire world will be smiling. Exponential nature of social networks. The same with making other people feel good, complimenting people. If you make 3 people, or even better, 4 people a day feel good, and they pay it forward and make 4 others feel good, and so on, within very little time, the whole world would be made to feel better. This is the nature of an exponential function. So smiles and laughter are contagious, and to illustrate, I want to show a quick video.
A ver cuánto tiempo aguantas sin reír.
All right, I have to see this one more time. Sorry.
A ver cuánto tiempo aguantas sin reír.
All right, so the theme of the class today is babies. We're going to see another one soon. So let's understand, what is the nature of an exponential function so that we can understand the power of 1. I'm looking for someone to make a deal with me. Here is the deal. What I'm going to do is ask you, this is all voluntary, you don't have to do it, but here's the deal. I'm going to ask you to give me each day, or rather, I'm going to give you, whoever signs this deal with me, $1,000 every single day for the next 30 days. And what you will give me in return is, on the first day, 1 cent, 1 penny. On the second day, 2 cents. Third day, 4 cents. Every day, twice as much as the previous day, starting with 1. Who would like to make this deal with me? Again, every day I give you for the next 30 days $1,000. And what you do is every day for the next 30 days give me 1 cent, the next day 2, 4, 8, and so on. Anyone? Any takers? 1. Looking for some more. So that's $30,000 down for me. Any more? Okay, good. Whew. All right, so here is the deal. Here is what will happen. On the 30th day, I will give you another $1,000. You'll have a total of $30,000 from me. On the 30th day, I will be getting from you a total, including the first 29 days. No, rather, on the 30th day, I'll be getting from you $5,368,709.12. Double that, times it by 2. This is the amount of money that I will be making in 1 month. 1 cent on the first, 2 on the second, and so on. Now, for most people, it seems extraordinary because people don't understand the nature of an exponential function and therefore don't understand the nature of the power of 1. Here's another example. Just kidding, I'll let you off the hook. Just another example. This captured my imagination when I was a kid. My dad told me about the invention of the chess game. Some of you know the story. So the inventor of the chess game was in India. Went to the local king, and the king was very impressed with the game and said, "How can I reward you?" And the chess player said, "No, it's okay, really." And the king said, "No, I want to reward you. How can I reward you?" So the inventor of the chess game said, "Okay, what I'd like is, on the first first block, first square, I would like 1 grain of rice. On the second, I would like 2 grains of rice. On the third, 4 grains of rice, and so on and so on. That's my request. And the king said, are you sure that's all you want? I'm prepared to give you a lot. This is a wonderful game. And the inventor said yes. So the king told his assistant to go and give the man his wish. And when they started to calculate how much rice would be needed to fill up all the blocks all the way to 2 to the power of 63, they realized that the rice could fill up the entire world with a thick layer. Again, misleading, fail to understand it because we don't understand the nature of exponential change. Another last one. So how many times do you think, so you all have pieces of paper in front of you, how many times do you think you need to roll over the piece of paper for the piece of paper to reach the moon? The moon, 240,000 miles away from us. How many times do you need to fold the piece of paper so that you can reach the moon? 41 times. So if you can have a piece of paper here and you fold it 41 times by the end of the class, you can reach the moon. I don't know why they make such a big deal out of, a person landing on the moon. Seems quite simple to me. And here is the point. We underestimate our capacity to affect change because we underestimate the growth of an exponential function. We're influencing people and the world every minute of our lives. The question, though, is in which direction are we going to do it? Are we going to be a force for change, be deliberate, be practical idealists, or just have the good intentions without the effort that's necessary to bring about a positive exponential function? The final project for this course, as you know, is a presentation that you will give, whether it's for the FAST students or the extension school students. You're going to be giving a lecture to other people. And when we put together the class, this is precisely what we thought about. How you can affect change, and those people whom you change will hopefully influence others, and so on and so on. In many ways, the idea was taken from the film Paid Forward. And what I want to do now is show you a quick excerpt, just the coming soon of Paid Forward for those of you who haven't seen it. Because in Paid Forward, they capture this very idea of human networks as exponential functions.
It's just a big disappointment. Unless you take the things that you don't like about this world and you flip them upside down, and you can start that today.
That's me, and that's 3 people, and I'm going to help them. Then they do it for 3 other people, then they do it for 3 more. But it has to be something really big, something they can't do by themselves.
Lost your car?
That's a keen observation.
I can help you.
You're giving me a brand new Jaguar and you don't want anything?
Call it generosity between 2 strangers.
What did you tell my son to make him bring a homeless man into my house?
I've got a story, okay? Senior partner Kenny and Moss is giving away new cars.
Just pay it forward. 3 big favors for 3 other people.
You can't just put 2 people together and make them like each other.
It's the one.
Pay it forward. Paying it forward. It's like this idea.
You can fix the person.
Do you want to come in and stay?
It's complicated.
Come in. It's supposed to be something hard.
I don't care about your burns, Eugene, if that's even what they are. Is that what they are?
I can't.
Don't tell me how sorry you are for me!
Maybe you're scared to get rejected. Well, I can't reject you. You're too quick for me.
Are you still gonna pay it forward? Give her another chance. You were lit.
I want to wear the green dress.
I'm so good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Pay it forward. The movement. It's reached LA, Mrs. McKinney. Come on, the movement?
So you're like, Blanca, we don't change the world.
She might just squeak by with a C.
Impact 3 people, who each impact 3 others, and 3 others within 20 degrees of separation. You can change the world, the entire world.